With the salmon. And then last night I grilled salmon and I was just hankering for Pinot Noir. And I think that's just an indication of where our customer base is. And so Southern California is probably one of the last places in the country that gets the fall weather. You know, we're kind of notorious here for having Septembers that stay pretty warm. Sometimes the warmest month of the year, in fact. But and all of a sudden, the air feels different. I feel like fall is in the air. We don't get foliage change or anything like that, but it definitely felt it. So perfect to be releasing a wine like this. There are some wines that are more versatile in terms of like times of year you can serve them. And then there's wines that are a little less versatile with when you can serve them, but maybe the less versatile ones really hit the sweet spot for that kind of winter, fall wine drinking. And Barba Cesco hits that sweet spot. This is a big wine, no question about the brawniness, the size of it, in every metric that people measure how big a wine is. We can talk about that in a second, actually. But this wine checks all the boxes. Let's put it that way. So a little bit about the producer. We all know, not we all, but most of you guys know Elio Filippino's wines. Several, if not most of you, have met Elio. He's been here, I want to say he's been here 5 times, at least 4 times, visiting San Diego and doing winemaker dinners with us. He was here not too long ago. And so Elio's wines are always extremely expressive. I always describe them as he's able to coax more aroma, more power, more flavor out of each varietal that he works with than most wineries that I work with that you guys are selling. There's something that Elio is doing in the combination of the vineyard and winemaking that really brings intensity to his wines. There's very little, if any, of Elio's wines that I would describe as subtle. Maybe the Gavi's a little subtle, but even that has a real kind of, vibrant acidity to it and a juiciness to it. Elio's wines are intense. And Elio is 3rd generation. His grandfather started the winery. His father sort of made wines and mostly sold grapes, but made wines as well. Going on 50 years. In fact, I think it says it on each bottle. No, it must just say it on the Barbarescos. I don't see it on this bottle. On his Barbarescos, you guys have seen it before, where it puts the number of years in one corner of the winery making wine, and then the other side of the label puts the number of years Elio himself making the wine. And I want to say it's wineries.
That's Barbaresco.
Yeah. And I want to say the winery is producing wine for over 50 years now, growing grapes for quite a bit longer than that as just a vineyard. producing wine for over 50 years. And Elio, I believe, is just passing 30 years of winemaking himself. And so a lot of experience there, a lot of knowledge and know-how with their land. Elio's vineyards are spread throughout. He has small pieces that he owns kind of all over Piedmont, but most of it, I want to say about 80%, maybe 90% of his vineyards are surrounding the town of Neive. And Neive is one of the villages of the Barba Cesco DOCG. So Barba Cesco, very famous wine. Barolo and Barba Cesco, the king and queen of Italian wines, Piedmont's most famous wines. Neive is a village in the DOCG of Barba Cesco. That's where his winery is. A bigger area is Alba, which is where these grapes come from. But that encompasses, if you're growing Barbera in Neive, in town of Barolo, in the town of Barba Cesco, if you're growing Barbera in those villages, you can call it Barbera de Alba because Alba is a bigger province than Barba Cesco is a DOCG, if that makes sense. So his grapes are spread throughout, but the majority of them are centered right near the Barba Cesco DOCG. Oh, I got a couple latecomers. Let me see if I can let them in here. All right. There we go. All right. Most of the grapes that he's growing are around this Barba Cesco DOCG. This particular bottling, named after his uncle Francesco, who planted the vineyard back in the 1950s, are old vine Barbera that are producing some of the most, if not the single most intense Barbera grapes that I've ever tasted. And I think I'll sort of tell you kind of an anecdotal story, which often don't really mean anything because it's anecdotal. It's almost the definition of it, right? But I think for me, it really influenced the way I looked at Barbera because of Elio's Barba Cesco, because of the Villa Turlina wines that we carry. I had this impression of Barbera grapes being these wonderfully intense, juicy, fruit-forward, amazing wines. And so for years, I made the mistake of when I'd be at a restaurant and I didn't feel like dropping the coin necessary for a Barolo or a Barba Cesco, but I wanted something from Piedmont. I love Piedmont wines. I would also often choose Barbera and was more often than not just totally disappointed. The standard that these wines, Villa Turlina wines, which we get every year as well, but the Barba Cesco specifically, the standard that it sets for Barbera is so high that most of the other Barberas on the market, when I taste them, seem very simple, very one-dimensional, kind of light, just nowhere near where this delivers. And in particular, this vintage is really powerful, really intense, powerful. He's had some vintages that I would describe as more elegant. This is definitely on the powerful side of those vintages. I think I wrote it in the description here, but for those of you who are going to relay information and help your customers out who are buying this, minimum 45 minutes in a decanter. This is definitely a wine that comes out of the bottle at 15.5% alcohol. My guess is it's higher. It's probably getting close to 16. But we can fudge it within a percentage point. So 15.5 to me seemed a little bit more friendly for those who are maybe a little intimidated by high alcohol. This comes out of the bottle packing a pretty big wallop. And so if you allow 20, 30, 40 minutes in a decanter, the longer the better. The wine just starts to really open up. Some of that heat from the alcohol kind of burns off. You start getting more of that sort of undertones and nuances that I love about Elio's wines, because right out of the bottle, it is black fruits, it's oak, it's alcohol, and it's just power. But then as it sort of settles, it really starts to pick up some more of those complexities and nuances that I love about all of Elio's wines. Again, this guy, we called him the Nebbiolo Whisperer for a while, but I think that was, it was based on the Nebbiolo that he does for his Barba Cesco and Barolos. But I really think it sort of took away his prowess with Barbera. So I he's just the grape whisperer. This guy's just able to bring out intense flavors more so than most wineries that I've experienced in my life. So the 2020 vintage, excellent year for Piedmont. Hot year, which is sort of standard these days. Temperatures, climbing in just about every wine region. Occasionally you get these cool years that people freak out about, and they're like, it's a cold year, but really what that is sort of a return to normal. And what we're used to now, the new normal, is considerably higher temperatures in almost every wine region that we work with, everywhere in the world. And so fruit sugars go up, acidity goes down. You always are searching for that balance. Winemakers are really having to pivot in their production, because certain region, used to struggle to achieve certain fruit sugar levels. Fruit sugars obviously convert directly into alcohol, and people were always chasing these fruit sugars. Now I feel like it's the opposite. It's been a real change where people are now trying to sort of mitigate fruit sugar and allow acidity to stay in balance, because when it's that hot and when it's that there's that much sun, fruit sugars go up. So Elio is always a master of achieving that balance. And but in a vintage like 2020, 15.5, whatever, 15.8, whatever it happens to be, is not uncommon. And if you want to ripen your fruit all the way, which obviously you do, you're going to wind up with alcohol levels that high. So a couple things about this wine specifically that I love, marketing wise. I love the whole concept of it being named after his uncle Francesco. So in the Piedmont dialect, Barba means uncle, Barba, and Cesco is short for Francesco. So this is named after his uncle Francesco. But as we all know, one of the most famous wines of Piedmont is Barbaresco. And so it's not by mistake that he named this wine Barba Cesco Barbera. It's sort of a play on words. So it confuses some people, especially if you're selling this wine to somebody who's had his Barbaresco and you're saying, I've got Elio's Barba Cesco. Very easy to mistake that, but it's done on purpose. And the idea there is paying homage to his uncle, but he's also paying homage to his region and where he's centered, which is in the heart of the Barbaresco DOCG, which, by the way, one of the most beautiful wine regions in Italy, if not the world. If you haven't had a chance to go to Piedmont, I strongly recommend it. It's a beautiful place. The food is next level. Probably my favorite of the Italian food regions is Piedmont. And then the wines are just spectacular. So Barba Cesco, Barbaresco, kind of a play on words. I like that. I like the fact that he puts on each bottle the number that this bottle is. I'm looking at bottle 1469, 1,469 bottles out of a total production of 8,437 bottles. So those of us who can do math calculations by 12 for all these years of being in the wine industry, you divide that quickly by 12, 84, 37, you're looking at about 700 cases total production. So not a lot, not a lot of this wine to go around, but I think customers really like that. I know I do when I buy a wine. If I see, oh, wow, cool, this is bottle number 1469 out of 8437. It just tells you the size of this winery and the care that can go into each bottle. There's a direct relationship between quality, and I'll never find anybody to convince me otherwise, between the quality and the production size. It's not impossible to produce a fantastic wine at 10,000 cases or 120,000 bottles or way up, but it sure is difficult. Whereas small production wine, you can really put a little bit more effort and do the small things, from the grapes in the vineyard, through the fermentation process, through the aging process, through the barrel selection. You can do it all when on a smaller scale, and the quality tends to show that. So in my opinion, wines like this are hard to beat in terms of quality. So we'll talk about the flavors and the aromas here. First of all, the color, probably see, pretty intense, deep, purplish, maroon. I always think of maroon as a little less bright than ruby. This is a little bit more dense in its color structure. The core of it, like if you pour more, you'd see a darker look. I'm not going to pour more. It's Monday morning, and this is a 15.5% alcohol wine. So I'm certainly not going there. But yeah, the color definitely shows intensity. It shows density, and it shows a little bit of an indication of what you're going to get on the nose. And the nose is really, really intense. So I get sort of a smashed or macerated berry or cherry, black fruit. I get a little bit of tobacco. I get a little bit of like a menthol, and I don't think it's alcohol, because this one has been open now plenty of time, and so the alcohol's blown off. But I get a little bit of eucalyptus or menthol on the nose. Also a little bit of chocolate, but with a kind of a back tone of mint, and maybe that is that menthol / eucalyptus, sort of leaning towards mint. But it reminds me a little bit of like dark chocolate with mint, like an Andes candy. You guys remember those? Oh, wow, yeah. And just powerful, perfumey fruit. Again, this is, to me, after drinking many vintages of Elio's wines, then Barba Cesco, I think we're going back to 2005 vintage that we've been, or maybe 2008 vintage, something like that we've been importing. This is the 2020. So I've had a dozen vintages of this wine, and some of them lean towards elegant, and then some of them lean towards powerful. This is like, if elegant is here and powerful is here, this is like all the way to the powerful side. Oh yeah. So the thing I immediately noticed, having taken a sip now, paying attention, is that alcohol that was there when I first opened this bottle on the palate is not there. So I do think that the sort of menthol mintiness is not an alcohol smell. That's kind of just something that's nuanced within the fruit, because I'm not tasting any alcohol. Once it breathes, it really opens up nicely, and that high alcohol burns off, and it's got, the classic Elio balance. The flavors are long in the mouth. Still tasting it. It's got some pretty strong tannin. Barbera's tannins aren't known to be as like hard, is the term, as Nebbiolo's tannins. But again, when you're using a vineyard planted 70 years ago, those grapes are coming off the vine pretty dense, structured. You're not getting a lot of fruit, but what you are getting is, pretty tight, compacted berries with pretty thick skin. So Barbera is known as a little more acid than tannin, whereas Nebbiolo has that real hard tannin. This wine sort of covers both. It's got some acidity to it for sure, but it's also got some pretty strong tannin. I think this is a no-brainer 15-year wine from the vintage, so it's 2020. There's no way it'll last that long in my house, and nor should it in anybody's house. It's drinking beautifully right now at 4 years old. But it would be interesting to watch and see how this wine develops over the next maybe 6 to 8 to 10 years, getting on to 12, 14 years from the vintage. It's beautiful. Food pairing. I think I was pretty generic. I don't remember what I wrote on the food pairing. What did I put on there? On this description, I didn't. It's probably on the tech sheet. I mean, this would go really well with, your braised or roasted meat. It'd have to be a pretty strong cheese to be served with, just a cheese plate. But certainly if you had the right cheeses and some salamis and charcuterie, that would go really well. But I think this is more of a main course type of food. So anybody out there want to share maybe what they've had over the years with Barba Cesco? Maybe not this vintage if you just got it in like this morning or this weekend and you haven't had a chance to build a meal around it, but we've had plenty of vintages. What food suggestions do you think would sing with our customers and sort of capture them?
Well, I don't typically pair with
go ahead.
Food with the Barba Cesco. What I would say is that his Barolo and Barbarescos, for me personally, require food pairings because of the high acidity. Mm-hmm. But the Barba Cesco is one that you can have with food, without food. It's one of my favorite reds from Italy overall. So, because it's powerful, it's elegant, it's a great food pairing wine. So, I mean, one of my favorites from Elio for sure. So
nice.
I was going to say, I took this to a private tasting a couple of months ago. And it was an all Italian tasting for a new client referral that was going to Italy, and he wanted to invite over a bunch of neighbors and do a wine tasting. And this was one of the reds that we brought, and everybody, like all of our clients, everybody went absolutely crazy over it. It's like the clients that we all have that only want to drink Napa Cabs, and then we get them Barba Cesco, and they're like, oh my God, that was amazing. Can I have more of that? Like, it's just a really easy and awesome bridger wine to bring people into the more nuanced styles of Italian reds. And at this tasting, there was a whole bunch of different Italian foods, but he had made truffle risotto, which was really great, and then lamb lollipops, and everybody was like freaking out over those with the Barba Cesco. So
yeah, I could see that for sure. Piedmont is sort of the home of truffles. I mean, there's truffles everywhere. I shouldn't say everywhere, but there's truffles in the Pacific Northwest. There's truffles in Burgundy. There's truffles in Bordeaux. But Piedmont is known, the famous white truffle of Piedmont, which sells for something like, $3,000 or $4,000 a pound for the good white truffles. And so anything truffly goes usually pretty well with the wines of Piedmont. Like we do, the Benissimo food and wine and cheese pairings here, and the guy who runs the Benissimo wine and cheese pairings, Benissimo's cheese shop here in San Diego, always says what grows together goes together, right? And so truffles growing in the soil, served with wine from that same soil, usually it's a pretty good combination. So yeah, risotto. In fact, Chrissy makes a really good truffle risotto that we then do like 2 or 3 different types of mushrooms in the risotto. It's kind of sliced nice and thin, sort of mixed in, so each bite has a truffle-y mushroom flavor. And then I always like to get a little bit of a fillet, like a nice fillet, and cook it medium rare and slice it real thin and kind of lay it out over each plate, and then drizzle a little truffle oil on top of that with this wine, with his Barolos. Hard to beat that. So, all right, this is a fun wine. I wish we had more. The pitch that you guys are probably looking at says 55 cases. I wrote that because I got a count from Eric, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and didn't realize, I guess, that I'd given some more out. I'm weak like that. I just give away the Barba Cesco when people want it. So we had some other sales occur in the last couple weeks. So we are actually at 45 cases of this wine left, period. So it's around 500 bottles, just over. We brought 75 cases of this, as we usually do, between 75 and 100, depending on how much he's willing to part with. And so we're down to about 500 and change bottles. So the first thing you want to do is, circle back to customers who've had this in the past, because this is kind of a no-brainer. But my opinion is turn new people onto this wine. And they will, like Missy was saying, and Jonathan was saying, this is not a wine that requires food. And so many wine drinkers in the United States are used to drinking domestic wine where, yes, it goes great with food, but you don't have to have it with food. You can pour yourself a big glass of it with absolutely nothing to eat, and it's great. This wine sort of allows that. I think with Italian wines, Elio would be, he'd roll his eyes, and his father would probably roll around in his grave if he heard not recommending food with this wine, because Italians just don't drink wine especially red wine. Don't drink red wine almost ever without food. When you're over there, you'll see they'll drink Prosecco, they'll drink white, they'll drink some rosé without food, or they'll drink cocktails. But when they open up a red wine, it almost always has food with it. But this is a great example of getting somebody who's used to not having food and maybe not as creative in the kitchen. They can drink this wine and fall in love with an Italian wine, and then start getting into the other styles that maybe do need a little bit more of a food pairing. So I love that idea of getting this into people's glasses who are usually drinking California wine. But I will warn them, then don't go out and make the mistake that I did and start looking for Barberas everywhere because you love this Barbera. because you're going to be disappointed. I've sort of given up on Barbera on restaurant lists, and unless I know the producer, because I've just been disappointed so many times when the standard is Barba Cesco, and I go out and I get a Barbera that is just like thin, acidic, but with hardly any tannin and hardly any concentration. That's how most of them are. It's a little fruit fly driving me crazy. All right, so 45 cases of this wine. A fun wine to get into people's glasses, a fun wine to turn people on to new styles. And then, of course, we have a loyal customer base who just love Elio's wines. And I think most of them, if you did a survey, would probably put Barba Cesco as the number one. So